Formations are one of the most basic aspects of infantry combat to learn, both for real-world practitioners and for amateurs learning them as a hobby. Any manual will include an overview of the different formations that units can use, such as the fireteam wedge, the squad column, or the platoon 2 up, 1 down V formation. All of this makes sense because it doesn't take a genius to realize that arranging soldiers in a formation helps to maintain order in the chaos of battle, leading to more effective units in combat. But anybody who's tried to implement these formations into video games like Squad will know that they're kind of on the useless side. Standing in a line formation with your buddies to maximize forward firepower sounds great in theory until it feels more like you're just being tied down and unable to move, or maybe using a staggered column formation to move down a street through an urban environment may sound tactical as hell until everybody gets gunned down by a single vehicle parked down the road. So what explains this disconnect between real-world theory and video game practice? Questions like this are what I want to answer. Today I will explain to you the general principles behind modern infantry formations, how they work, and why they may or may not be practical for video games like Squad. I'm going to be drawing from my knowledge of real-world tactics and from my knowledge of Squad to explain some concepts and then translate those concepts to the game in a way that is hopefully useful. Combined with some examples to help illustrate my points, this video should help explain how to actually use formations in video games. Ultimately, I want Squad to have a healthy community that's willing to work together as a team, exchange thoughts and ideas, and to help teach those who are new. Now, we have a long way to go, but my goal is that this video contributes to such a community. And if you're on board with that vision, and you're a returning viewer of my channel, please consider subscribing and joining the channel as a member. The first thing to understand about formations that many people miss or don't understand is that they're primarily for tactical movement. Modern infantry formations differ from the infantry formations of the past, such as the famous lines and columns of the Napoleonic Wars, in that they're not battle formations. Rather, the modern infantry uses formations as a means of getting from point A to point B and do it in a way that balances security versus mobility. It's the circumstances of the battlefield that surrounds you that dictates what kind of formation to use during the movement, which in turn will determine the circumstances under which you come into contact with the enemy. Now that we have that out of the way, let's talk about some theory regarding formations. Different formations have different pros and cons in 3 general parameters: mobility and control, firepower, and vulnerability. Mobility and control are closely related. Mobility is how easy it is for everyone in a formation to move around without the formation breaking apart. Control is closely linked to mobility because the easier a formation is to maintain during movement, the less attention is needed to keep it cohesive, both from the leader and from the constituent members. Formations that have more players arrayed front to back rather than side to side generally have superior mobility and control because each player can simply follow the person in front of them, which is a very natural way for humans to move. So natural, in fact, that even in-game, players almost always unintentionally form conga lines when they're advancing in the attack. Firepower is how many people in the formation can engage in a certain direction without adjusting their position. Formations almost always have directions where they have strong firepower, but other directions where they're very weak. Now, mobility and firepower towards one direction also correspond with another trade-off, an increase in vulnerability toward a different direction. Something like a file formation will have minimal firepower to its front and is thus more vulnerable there, but it's also not just about a lack of firepower. One of the worst things that can happen to a group of soldiers is to come under what's called enfilading fire. This is when incoming fire is aligned with the long axis of a formation, making it so that even a single shooter can engage the entire formation with minimal fuss. So a line formation engaged by a machine gun to its flank would be under enfilading fire. Similarly, a file formation engaged from the front would also be under enfilading fire. Generally speaking, the more linear a formation is, the more vulnerable it is to enfilading fire from its weak side, but it is also least vulnerable from its strong side. So to summarize, a formation has three key metrics: mobility and control, firepower, and vulnerability. Different formations help a unit to manage their collective directional firepower and vulnerability relative to the threats they face on the battlefield, balanced against the need for increased mobility and control. How do these three parameters for formations translate to video games like Squad? Quite simply, very well. Because these are very simple concepts describing the literal physical relationships between people. These are concepts that are inherent to any battlefield, whether physical or virtual, just like flanking will always positively translate from real life to gaming. Now that we've covered some of the different external factors driving formations, let's spend some time to talk about the internal ones as well. How do formations help in the management of soldiers? And of these factors, there are two: leader positioning and sectors of responsibility. In the real world, leader positioning, or even just having a leader at all, is very important for infantry tactics. A leader at the front of a formation can lead in navigation, set the pace of advance, and also have the psychological benefit of leading from the front. A leader can also choose to be at the center of their formation to maximize their awareness and control of the unit, while also reducing their personal vulnerability. However, for video games like Squad, leader positioning isn't as crucial as it is in real life. This is in large part because players in video games have a much better picture of what's going on around them than real-world soldiers would. In-game tools like the map, accessible at a simple button press, provide players with 100% reliable, instant, real-time updating information on their personal location and friendly locations. Players also have a greater capacity for multitasking in video games. For example, think about navigating these boulders in Squad. In game, this is a very simple task, just requiring that you hold down W and occasionally tap the spacebar. You would also be able to simultaneously scan your surroundings for threats, check your map, all while being ready to shoot at a moment's notice. Compare this to real life, where everything all of a sudden is much more complicated. You'd need to pick your way through these boulders very carefully, sometimes bracing yourself with your offhand, with your attention focused on the ground to avoid breaking an ankle. And you would also have to ensure that your weapon's muzzle is always pointed in a safe direction. So a video game player's enhanced capacity for situational awareness and multitasking means that ultimately unit control is very democratized, with a leader, if there's one at all, has a role that's more about setting the strategic direction for his men rather than having a hands-on leadership role. Unlike in real life, direct visual, vocal, and physical contact are not important for control in a video game, reducing the need for formations. Now, the second internal factor driving the need for formations is the establishment of sectors of responsibility. Take a look at this diagram of a fireteam wedge. Not only does this formation have different strengths and weaknesses in the parameters of mobility and control, firepower, and vulnerability that we discussed earlier, but it also assigns each member of the formation an area that they are responsible for covering. This ensures that the unit maintains 360-degree security without any gaps or minimal overlaps. And it's all done automatically according to where each member is in the formation. For example, the guy at the long side of the wedge knows that he's responsible for rear security, and he doesn't need to worry about watching for enemies forward where the unit is going. This in turn frees up the other formation members to focus on their own sectors to the flanks and to the front. Sectors of responsibility are a crucial aspect of formations that are very applicable to video games like Squad. A lack of situational awareness at the unit level is one of the biggest problems that leads to many lost firefights in this game. And even when players try to coordinate different sectors of responsibility, players usually need to spend precious time working things out amongst themselves without the automatic division of responsibilities that comes inherent with each formation. So to summarize this section, formations have two big advantages when it comes to a unit's internal management. First, they allow unit leaders to tailor how they control their unit and exercise their authority. Second, the formations come with built-in coordination features in terms of dividing sectors of responsibility. And I hope that you've realized by now that The shape that a formation takes is the least important trait of a formation and is more a shorthand descriptor of several different parameters that come packaged together. Okay, so why don't formations work in video games? Well, you may have guessed by now, but the truth is actually more nuanced than simply saying that formations are useless on the virtual battlefield. Yes, due to the different demands of a computer game environment like Squad, certain aspects of formations are less valuable than they are in real life. Gameplay mechanics like the map, compass, perfect voice comms, and also how tasks in games are much simpler to do than in real life means that the need for central leadership and tight spatial coordination isn't as necessary to maintain unit cohesion and effective command and control. That said, there is a difference between some aspects of formations not being useful in a game and formations not working well in a game. And that is because I think that there's an issue of training here in play as well. A lot of people that don't have this understanding of real life formations will simply focus on the most visible thing about them, the shapes. And I wish I was joking. A lot of players who utilize formations will read somewhere that this formation is good for this situation and is most often used in this scenario. So then they'll go in the game and say, okay, we gotta use the wedge formation for this situation we are in. And everyone will then fixate on creating and maintaining the shape of a wedge as if it had some magical property, while neglecting everything else about the formation that is important. Here's the reality. You don't need formations to be neat little shapes. You can use an ugly blob for all I care, as long as it fulfills the parameters you need for managing mobility, vulnerability, and firepower, and everybody has their sectors of responsibility, and the team is somewhat coordinated. If you need a leader for that, or you don't, doesn't matter. The shape of a formation itself is also not rigid. Take a look at this passage here from the US Army's Rifle Squad Manual. Fire teams modify the wedge when encountering rough terrain, poor visibility, or other factors make control of the wedge difficult. The normal interval is reduced so all team members can still see their team leader, and all team leaders can still see their squad leader. The sides of the wedge can contract to the point where the wedge resembles a single file. Soldiers expand or resume their original positions when moving in less rugged terrain where control is easier. All that's to say is practical need is what trumps everything else, including visual aesthetics. So I guess what I'm trying to say is formations are useful and they do work in video games as a vehicle for communicating strong gameplay principles and putting them into practice. If I'm leading a fire team in the attack and we're getting to the point where I know we're going to run into the enemy soon, taking the time to deploy my guys into a line formation does nothing but set us up for success. It gives the fire team a good spread without any clumping, and it enables players to concentrate their firepower forward with mutual support. Similarly, keeping everyone in a file formation during extended rapid movement can be very useful to ensure that everybody stays together without wasting any time worrying about relative positioning and formation keeping. Alright, so that was a summary of my thoughts regarding real-life infantry formations and their application to video games like Squad. If you found this insightful, please give this video a like. This video was a high-level overview that didn't really go into the details of specific formations. Rather, the goal was to help provide some context so that when you do go and read other pre-existing resources on formations like the squad column or the line or what have you, you'd have a better understanding of how to use that knowledge in-game. In particular, I highly recommend the US Army's ATP 3-21.8 Infantry, Rifle Platoon, and Squad, and the 2017 Ranger Handbook as good starting points. I'll put the links in the video description down below as they're freely and publicly available online. If there were things you disagreed with or have some extra thoughts to contribute, please comment down below, as a big goal of mine is to start discussions. I also have my channel's Discord server, link in the description, where you can take the discussion to a level that the YouTube comment section just might not be well suited for. I also have a link to the 7th Rangers clan Discord server if you want to join a group that is more milsim oriented to play squad with. Now, one aspect of formations that I didn't cover was how they come into play in combat, especially for larger ones that are composed of multiple subunits and subformations. I'll be covering that and some other aspects of putting formations to practical use in my next video about the movement to contact. So stay tuned and hit that subscribe and bell button to know when it's released. I hope you enjoyed, and thanks for watching.